Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the delightfully frustrating world of euphorbia plants, and we're going to talk about why throwing out the traditional rulebook might actually be the absolute best thing you can do for your houseplant collection. Now, if you've ever felt the sting of a prized plant inexplicably dying on your windowsill, trust me, you are in very good company. Today, we're unpacking some brilliant insights from master grower Rikus van Veldhuisen. He recently shared his highly unconventional wisdom on cultivating these notoriously tricky succulents. For years, people practically begged him to write a definitive step-by-step guide on how to grow them, and for years, he just completely refused. So let's find out exactly why.
Section 1. The Daily Euphorbia Struggle.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty shocking confession from an actual horticulture expert. Rikus van Veldhuisen openly admits that there are daily fatalities in his collection. Yes, daily. This just proves that even the absolute masters accidentally kill their plants, which, honestly, should instantly relieve a lot of our collective plant parent guilt. He freely admits that as a direct result of his cultivation skills, plants in his greenhouse die every single day. And you know, this honesty is just so refreshing because it highlights a massive truth in the plant world. There is simply way too many exceptions to ever have strict, foolproof rules.
In fact, his advice for growing incredibly difficult species, like, say, Euphorbia guilleminiana, is highly amusing. He simply says you should just assume some of them are going to die and plan to harvest seeds to replace them. He literally suggests that you should aim to have 5 healthy plants going into the autumn. Then, if you're lucky, maybe a few will actually survive the winter, and you can scramble to harvest their seeds in the spring to make up for your inevitable losses. I mean, for some rare plants, his only genuine advice is throwing his hands up and asking, how on earth do you cultivate that thing?
Moving on to Section 2. Rule number 1, no rules. To really understand the core philosophy of his entire approach, we just have to look at their natural environment. The extreme evolutionary diversity of Euphorbias is just astounding. They grow on literally every single continent except Antarctica. We're talking about a plant family that includes 30-meter-tall giants right alongside tiny, centimeter-tall dwarf varieties that barely even peek out of the soil. They thrive everywhere, from sea-level coastal plains all the way up to high-altitude mountain ranges, crossing incredibly different climate zones. So naturally, a towering tree and a tiny dwarf succulent are going to demand completely different growing conditions. A one-size-fits-all rule? Yeah, that's just not going to happen.
And here's the really wild part. It's exactly because of this immense capacity for adaptation that we can actually keep such vastly different plants together in a single greenhouse. Their natural ability to adapt completely surpasses our human ability to cultivate. We aren't actually creating the perfect, ideal environments for all these different species under one roof. Actually, scratch that. It's more like we are simply relying on their incredibly stubborn evolutionary will to survive whatever totally foreign conditions we happen to put them in.
Which brings us to Section 3, mentors and clashing methods. Now, if you want to become a truly skilled plant keeper, finding a mentor is absolutely crucial. Rikus found his mentor in a man named Job Kaiser over 30 years ago. But as we'll see, even the masters completely disagree on the basics. What's really fascinating here is how Rikus and Job completely clash over which specific plants make the best grafting rootstock, which is a super common technique used to save tricky plants. Rikus firmly believes that Euphorbia candelabrum gives him a much higher success rate and a longer-lasting rootstock. But his mentor, Job? He actually prefers Euphorbia canariensis and completely dislikes using candelabrum. And just to add another layer to the madness, other expert growers successfully use Euphorbia resinifera, a plant that Rikus himself strongly avoids using.
So what does this all mean for us? The big takeaway here is that you absolutely must test things yourself. What works beautifully for your mentor might fail completely in your greenhouse. You can visit other growers, absorb all their brilliant advice, and bring those great ideas home. But ultimately, you have to test them in your own highly specific microclimate. If an approach works, fantastic, you keep doing it. If it doesn't, you drop it immediately.
All right, Section 4. Rule number 2, trial and error.
Let's dive into a really fascinating case study involving a very specific propagation hack. It perfectly demonstrates this whole trial and error philosophy. So Rikus acquired a very rare Euphorbia nivulina. He got this specific specimen from a state palea collector, and since Indian Euphorbias with proper location data are super rare, he was thrilled to have it. He repotted it meticulously, gave it a prime spot, well, what he thought was a prime spot, and waited. But instead of thriving, for an entire year it just sat there, looking pathetic and weak, pushing out these incredibly thin, sad side shoots.
So he decided to take action and performed what is essentially a crucial surgical procedure. He cut off one of those weak branches, and then, get this, he applied ordinary cigarette paper to the fresh, wet cut. Why? Well, pressing the cigarette paper onto the wound prevents the cutting from drying out too aggressively and blocks fungal infections. But more importantly, he notes that this simple, everyday hack vastly speeds up the formation of healing callus tissue. After letting it dry in a warm, shady place for a week, he planted it, moved it to a plant ICU, and just hoped for the best.
And that leads us to Section 5. It's not always your fault. This is where we get the ultimate visual proof of why this hands-on, absolutely no-rules philosophy is so incredibly vital. It is honestly mind-blowing to see a massive, thriving, 2-year-old cutting sitting right next to its struggling parent plant. And here's the kicker. They were grown under the exact same conditions. That tiny cutting from the surgical procedure exploded with vital growth, while the original parent plant continued to just look miserable. Same greenhouse, exact same substrate, same grower.
This teaches us a couple of truly liberating things. First, you must experiment with propagation to ensure survival. If Rikus had just left that parent plant alone, he'd literally just be waiting for it to eventually die. But taking action, he saved that genetic line. And second, if two identical plants behave totally differently in the exact same soil, it is genuinely not always your fault. We really owe these amazing, pressure-relieving insights to networks like Euphorbia. They totally understand that sharing honest failures is just as important as sharing those perfect greenhouse successes. By translating and distributing these kinds of articles, they help everyday growers realize that cultivation is way less about following rigid academic rules and so much more about observation, adaptation, and a genuine willingness to make mistakes.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final, liberating thought to ponder the next time you feel guilty about a struggling houseplant. If two identical plants behave completely differently in the exact same soil, is it really your fault? The next time you walk past a plant that just isn't doing well, please don't beat yourself up. Instead, remember the daily fatalities of the experts. Grab a sharp knife, maybe track down some cigarette paper, and start experimenting. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and happy growing.